Hello and welcome to this post-conference webinar series. It's good that we had our first Project Controls Conference 2017 last month in September here in Sydney. Now with the deadline ahead, behind us, we are trying to capture some of the knowledge and lessons learned so we can share it with more people. And now we are going for this webinar series. So before I jump into the topic for today or for this session, a little bit about the project controls and myself. Yeah, so a little bit about myself. Danesh-Mand. I'm with Jacobs Aquenta. I'm an Asia Pacific Technical Director Risk, working with this engineering company. But my relationship with Project Controls Conference, I was the co-chair of the conference, the first one in Australia, in Asia Pac that we had, and we got a very good interest globally. I'm also the New South Wales President of Risk Engineering Society. We are one of the technical societies under Engineers Australia. I'm civil engineer, love construction, love building, love technology, everything related to building new things. Prior to joining to Jacobs, I was heading the planning and risk for UGL engineering across Australia, working on the transport projects, water, power generation, and so on. And as you can see, I don't want to go through all those items, but the risk is my passion. I have been the New South Wales President of Risk Engineering since 2013, and I've also had the opportunity to be part of the risk contingency guideline, which we published in 2016. And I'm also lecturing as well. It's quite interesting career path. But this is not the purpose of today. So today, I would like to share with you some of those items that we discussed at the Project Controls Conference, the one that we had in September, and hopefully the next one next year. I would like to introduce you to the topic for today, which is the most important word in Project Controls, the why. And I'm really pleased to have our guest speaker, Guy Barlow from Aconex, sharing his knowledge and experience with us today. We had the opportunity to have a Guy with us at Project Controls as a keynote speaker, and look at now, we are trying to share his knowledge with the wider team across the globe, which is fantastic. And at the end, we will have a short Q&A, which Guy and I will share some common questions that we discussed with the audience at Project Controls. Before we get into the discussion for today, I would like to share with you some of the funding or some of the lessons learned that we shared at Project Controls Conference. The conference well attended by more than 250 people across the globe. We are very pleased with the result. The conference hosted jointly by Engineers Australia, Risk Engineering Society, which I'm a New South Wales President, and also the Australian Cost Engineering Society, as well as the AACI in the States. So it's quite all of us, the committee, were quite pleased with the result. We discussed about the importance of the people, process, and technology. And unfortunately, unless we get all those elements right, getting a successful or efficient and effective project controls, it's for major projects, is quite challenging. So it's important to understand that all those elements, at least they need to meet some minimum requirements to be successful. The other thing that was quite interesting for us, and we discussed in a number of sessions with the audience, was that the role and the importance of the culture. We like it or don't like it, we are still human, unfortunately or fortunately. And it's important to understand the culture or the way we do things. It's so critical for the success of project controls. We love technology, I love simulation, I love methodologies, we love process, we love flowchart. But at the end of the day, we need to work together, and the way we think, all those responsibilities together will make the culture. And for a successful project controls, we need to make sure that we have a right culture for our project. We also quite interesting, we discussed about the disruptions, the new innovations, the technology is coming. There are some of those platforms, the enterprise structures. The disruption is coming, and the construction is probably a few steps behind compared to some of the other sectors. Now, the project controls, we need to be ready for that. We need to make sure that we maximize opportunities to to drive innovation, to maximize the benefit for our projects and for our stakeholders. The other element, the other discussion that we had, and that was quite interesting, was the diversity, and why diversity, and not just gender diversity, but overall in terms of the age, in terms of the skills, in terms of experience, is that diversity is so critical for project controls, and how we can close some of those gaps which we are currently facing. Unfortunately, some of the indicators, they're suggesting that we are not doing that well, and there is a huge potential, especially for engineering and project controls, that we can close some of those gaps that we currently facing. The last but not the least, because I was just trying to keep few items here, the key items, was that how much controls and how much risk management is enough. One of the interesting conversations and the discussions or concepts is that you put too much into risk management, you started to get to the point that you're not getting value. So in other words, you're not only losing value, but also you're wasting your time and money. Making decision on the optimum level of project controls and the risk management is one of those interesting areas, and hopefully we will have some sort of a specific webinar later on that subject specifically. But I would like to introduce you to our guest speaker today, because the time is limited. The project controls and whys. There are some of the whys that we need to be able to answer, unless otherwise we cannot get an effective project controls, something that the exec can use to make a decision. At the end of the day, the risk management, the project controls, they don't solve the problem, but they will help executives to make an informed decision, and that's the key. That's a key element. On that introduction, I would like to introduce you to our guest speaker for today, Guy Barlow. I had the pleasure to meet Guy when he came to Australia last month. And the Guy is a global commercial director, connected costs with Aconex, which probably you heard about them. They're global. They do everything document-related, knowledge-based management. And the Guy is currently responsible for the overall success of project control solution, including the product, sales, services, and marketing. And prior to that, I knew Guy when he was with Oracle, leading industry strategy, and but we never met. So that was quite pleasant to meet him last month. But Guy's experience is across the energy, E&C, and public sector, as well as a wide range of projects. So more than 20 years experience working on KPMG, consulting, IBM software, all those big names, PwC. But he's a great guy. He's a great person. He's a great personality. He put a number of papers, conference speakers. He's definitely engaging, and I personally look forward to his talk today as well. So on that short, brief introduction, I will give it to Guy.
Pedram, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And yes, our paths have crossed because it's such a small world, the project controls world. So thanks for that introduction. And I appreciate everyone listening today. I'm going to go through this really quickly in the interest of time. And as Pedram said, it's a consolidated or encapsulated version of the presentation I did at the event last month. And I'm going to explore something that's a little bit different that I think helps unearth some ways in which we can do things better in the project controls world. You know, and it's no surprise that projects require rapid decisions, right? That's not new. That's something we've always lived with in this business, in these industries, is we have to turn around things quickly and make informed and accurate decisions. But there's things in the environment, right, that are conspiring against us. And, you know, some of these are fairly obvious. It seems to me that the cycle time is getting more compressed. So, you know, probably driven by technology, people are expecting decisions to be made more quickly now. Certainly the stakes are getting higher. Many of the projects out there are taking on qualities of what we call mega projects, right? These are in the multi-billion-dollar range. And, you know, I'm so old, I remember when large projects were in the $1 million range, I like to tell people. So the stakes financially are getting much higher. And then I think a third thing that is happening is that the exposure is greater than ever. And what do I mean by that? Simply that, you know, we have to answer to regulators now more frequently than we did in the past. Stakeholders, there's many environmental regulations and interested groups that we have to speak to now and keep apprised of our situation, who, you know, rightly so, have a vested interest in seeing these projects executed successfully and responsibly. But the bottom line is we've got a lot more people looking at us, and I guess you could say we're sort of under a microscope. So that's sort of the dynamic that I see changing, among many other things, obviously, in the project world. But looking inward, and this is something that we don't do too often in this business, looking inward, there's actually things that exacerbate the situation, right? So rapid decision making in this complex, time-constrained environment, high stakes, is actually made worse through some of the biases that we bring to the decision-making process. And so this is what I want to focus on as quickly as I can. And whether we like it or not, it's in our DNA. And over a number of decades, Danesh-Mand, who actually won a Nobel Prize, did research with a colleague of his, and they found that there were cognitive biases that impacted our ability to make good decisions, okay? So they came up with a basis for common human errors, and some of those are listed right here. And they challenged the assumption of human rationality, right? So many of these will probably look familiar to you, some may not, but I think we can all relate to them, right? There's a couple I just want to focus on in the interest of time. One is the confirmation bias, and one is the overconfidence bias. The final one on the list I love because I can always blame that on my kids, right? The fundamental attribution error. You know, when things go wrong, you blame someone else. My kids are always doing that. But the confirmation bias is pretty straightforward, right? You look for information that supports your belief. You only use information, research, analysis that supports what you have in mind when you're making a decision. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. The overconfidence bias is simply too much faith in your own knowledge, right? I've been doing this for 20 years, 30 years, 40 years. I know how long it's going to take. I know how much money it's going to take. You know, leave me alone. I'm going to go make the decision myself. But too often, more often than not, frankly, you ask someone how long is it going to take? 2 weeks, $200,000, and you come back 5 weeks later and it's now $500,000 and they're only halfway through the project, right? It's just endemic in our industry. So I think if we look at some of these biases, which are just inherent literally in our DNA, we can start to think about the ways in which we can make better and more informed decisions. So the first step to any problem is admitting you have a problem, right? Or the first step to any solution is admitting you have a problem, rather. That's the correct way to say it. So I think what you need to do is when you look at these, and certainly when you look at the confirmation bias, challenge what you think, right? Don't just look for data that supports your existing beliefs. I'm guilty of it. You know, I'm guilty of looking for information that supports what I think is the right answer. You know, and rejecting data that goes against what you believe is not necessarily the best way to operate, right? It might expose other areas in your thinking. And Pedram talked about diversity, right? There's diversity of ideas and diversity of thinking. You know, let's take that into the way in which we make decisions to make a more informed decision, maybe break away from some of the confirmation biases that plague us. The overconfidence bias, like I said, it's your ability to overcome it is to find that objective data, right? So don't rely too much in your own knowledge, right? I mean, it's a humbling experience, but there are other people out there that probably have some really good thoughts and insights that you should look into. And are you making fact-based decisions based upon information that hopefully does not conform to your biases? But those fact-based decisions are hopefully going to be better than the hunches and the gut decisions that you make when you tend to have an overconfidence bias. So just a couple of things here quickly to think about as you go through the process of decision making. So what does this mean for us really as project folks? Well, there's really two big issues here, and it sort of all boils down to that gut decision making, if you will. I think many of us are aware of one decision, and that one decision is we live in a world where technology done right can make our lives easier. But the current situation, the state of project controls, the status quo, if you will, is that all this information is disparate, siloed, call it what you will, and we scramble to get that information. The trouble is these biases that we have, which we cannot avoid entirely, require time to correct, right? We need to actually pause for a minute and think about it and ask the question, why? And that's why is the most important question. Why am I making this decision? Why am I leaning in this direction? Why haven't I checked out other sources of information? And that is becoming increasingly hard because of the compressed time frames, the disparate information that we scramble for to get that report out, that we don't have time to address them. So we're actually making conceivably worse decisions now than we have in the past because a lot of things are conspiring against us. You know, and it's situations like this, right, where we have these large projects that involve numerous organizations, numerous documents being exchanged back and forth between different groups. It's a familiar situation, and there's a lot of information, and as a result of that, a lot of decisions need to be made. You know, so for those 122,000 RFIs that are coming in on this project, there's going to be an expectation of a quick turnaround, an informed turnaround in the decision-making process. And the only way that you can really do that, I believe, is if you are able to integrate that information, right? That's what can help us. So technology, as Pedram said, it's people, process, technology. And here we're talking about effectively two things, the people and the technology side. If we can create the information in such a way that it's easy to access, easy to get to, real-time information, it then gives us more time to correct for those biases, right? It gives us the time to think about, are we making the correct decision? Why am I making this decision? Okay, so if we get the integrated information, it gives us time to think about our biases. It also frees us up to other areas, I think. And this is another thing that I think where technology can really help us out. To answer some of those bigger questions, right? So in general, the time-saving nature of technology will help us make better decisions, but it also gets us thinking about different things that we may not have thought about in the past, because as we try to scale and grow our respective businesses, we can start asking questions around innovation. You know, we can start tapping into the data that's being developed on these projects, and you know, which projects are the most risky, you know, what methods work best for different industries or different regions around the world. How can we integrate you know, mission critical systems, you know, things of that nature. How can we scale our business? So I think at the end of the day, where we get to is that we get to a point where our decisions are going to be made better. And that extra time we have also has benefits where we can start thinking about the bigger questions, right? And truly rely on technology to do what it was intended to do, is to speed things along and make things more integrated and fluid and dynamic, to free us up to do the bigger thought and bigger thoughts and the bigger thinking.
Oh, fantastic. I mean, thanks, Guy. Again, I got a few points and I took them because I need to go back to them and think about them. Guy, as you know, thank you. I mean, as you know, at Jacobs, I mean, globally, we're running many workshops, including the risk workshops, which I'm passionate about. And when we run them, they quite often be facing the fingers crossed, the optimism bias, should be okay. And what I found, my personal experience, is that the people, sometimes they don't think about the likelihood, if the likelihood is too low, and they just they don't consider them. So in your view, how can we increase the awareness and recognition of all those cognitive biases, including the optimism bias? What's your view?
Yeah, look, I got to commend you, and hats off to you, because I remember when we spoke about this briefly in Sydney, you mentioned exactly that you are running these workshops and you are addressing them. And I think that's the first step, right? The first step is bringing recognition to those in project controls that there are certain things outside of technology, outside of these core processes that are just uniquely part of our DNA, which is the truth, and our evolutionary, past that crop up to make decisions flawed in the modern world. And creating awareness through your workshops is helpful. So I think taking a page out of your playbook, Pedram, I would certainly encourage anyone who's running workshops to at least include mention of these biases, right? Sort of the hidden gotchas and the things that can blindside you that may not be traditionally covered in college courses, in continuing education. So I think certainly making it more aware, and hopefully in a small way, you and I can make people more aware of it through things like these webinars and like the Project Controls Conference.
Absolutely, absolutely. And Guy, where do you think the artificial intelligence playing? What's the role of AI in this picture? How we can use the AI to improve or communicate the message more?
Yeah, I think from an AI perspective, everyone's talking about artificial intelligence, and it's we all know it's starting to get good traction in certain markets, and many of the social media like Facebook and Google are big advocates of it. I think we're going to see it creeping into project controls a lot more in the future, and that may scare a lot of people, being replaced by robots, so to speak. But sort of going back to my last point, Pedram, I genuinely think that as we incorporate AI, some of these rote and basic processes that we have to do as humans can be taken over, can be automated by way of AI to free us up to think about the bigger things, right? That to me is probably the most important thing that I see AI doing, is freeing us up to truly take advantage of our cognitive power. Hopefully avoiding some of the biases that we have. So that's why I see it taking us, actually. It's just getting us out of some of the mundane things we need to do, Pedram, and really elevating us as a community. Yeah.
Excellent. Excellent. Yeah. Okay, so on that basis, we can close before you, or you want to go for a couple of questions, Guy?
Yeah, I'm not going to let you off the hook that easily. Come on.
Go ahead.
So, like we said, you and I caught up a little bit down in Australia, and I guess, the couple of things I have, a couple of questions that come to mind is, when you kind of step back and consider all these intangible factors, right? When do you think is the best time to assess and quantify project risks and contingencies? What in your view, and you've got a great history and great expertise around this, what do you think are some of the best, most opportune times, Pedram?
Oh, great question, Guy. It's actually I think there are 3 rules that can help you to define the best time. Unfortunately, no one knows those 3 rules. But what I'm trying to say is that unfortunately there is no formula, there is no rule. While the risk assessment, the risk management side of it is the ongoing process, or should be the ongoing process as you start any action. The risk management doesn't do anything for you unless it's helping you to make an informed decision, as I said earlier. So from that perspective, the risk management is actually the ongoing process. Don't do it too early because you don't have the knowledge. You start it early as you do everything else, and then you put the risk management or risk assessment as part of your decision making. Don't do it too late, because if you do it too late, you may not have enough opportunity to fix problems or change plan or put some actions. Again, when it comes to the tendering, when it comes to the putting a submission, especially the lump sum EPC submissions, my personal experience is that if you have a time, 6 months or 2 months, whatever it is, by the time you get about 60 to 70% of that time, my experience is suggesting that maybe it's a good time, not the best time, not the only time. It's a good time that you can actually have enough knowledge to do the risk and contingency assessment. Not the risk management. The risk management is ongoing. The risk assessment and contingency is probably within that sort of timeline. Is quite a reasonable time to have an optimum effort for getting the reasonable result. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, no, thanks. No, that's great. And it's, yeah, everything comes back to timing, whether it's decision making, you know, from a bias perspective or from a risk assessment perspective, which I guess they're all tied together. So that's great. I guess, and kind of a nice way to, you know, kind of round out the conversation is, you know, just in your experience and your background, what do you think are some of the best methods of risk assessment to address these biases? You know, what do you think works? What doesn't work? What's your thoughts on this, Pedram?
Great question, Guy. Again, I think there are a number of ways, and it really depends on your team, your environment, the culture. The culture, again, is quite important. If we are running some risk workshops in Asia compared to Australia, we are facing different biases. In Asia, the age, for example, the seniority, it's having a key role, which is quite, in Australia, we may not have it that strongly. So what I'm trying to say is that the stage of the project, the culture, the environment, the project requirements, they're all having some influence. So unfortunately, there is, again, I wish there was a formula because I could make a fortune out of it. But for now, I'm keeping my consultancy role. What I can suggest to people is that some of the key areas that, for example, trying to engage with different people, try to talk to as many as people you can, trying to have it at the right time or the best time, not too early, not too late, trying to get people at the time that they have knowledge so they can support your assessment of biases. If you're trying to have some benchmark data, trying to separate your workshop in 3 sessions, pre-workshop, workshop, and post-workshop. If you have some dominant personality people, try to discuss the issues with them separately, not having everyone into the same room. It's, you know what I'm trying to say, it's just trying, if you have exec with you, sometimes my suggestion is that have a separate workshop with exec to get their opinion and then sit with the team. So at least you started to get the range of possibilities. And I think I mentioned earlier that when it comes to some of those risks and biases, the people, if the likelihood is too low, the people, I mean, as you said, we are wired to be optimistic. We are wired to be, we are trying to think positively. So, however, from the risk perspective, we better to consider the worst case scenarios as well, although the likelihood might be too low. If we cannot afford those worst case scenarios, we need to take a few actions to make sure that we are comfortable with the decision that we are making.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. No, that makes all the sense in the world. Ours is a pessimistic world, unfortunately, in project controls and risk assessment, but hopefully the outcome is positive. We just have to question, right? Continue to question and look for, like you said, diversity of opinion, take into account cultures. No one size fits all, and I think you're absolutely right. There's so many different factors that you have to take case by case, literally. So Pedram, with that, I'll hand it back over to you just to wrap things up.
Fantastic. So, so Guy, is there any, unfortunately, the time is limited. I'd love to keep talking to you because I'm enjoying having this conversation with you. I mean, at the personal level and professional level. But is there anything as a one thing that you want to leave with our audience? Do you want to say anything before we close that?
I think if there was one thing, you know, we are a community, right, Pedram? That's what you're trying to build and grow down in Australia, and I think it's important for us to stay connected. So I think, Pedram, hopefully I'm speaking on behalf of you as well, that if anyone has any questions, by all means, you know, please reach out to us, because I think collectively we can really grow this industry and grow it successfully if we all pull together, and that means in large part helping each other. So that's what I'd like to leave people with. Just reach out to us if they have any questions.
Guy, you did say everything that I wanted to say, so it's there is nothing else for me to say. Absolutely, I agree. It's if you want to see the change, we need to be part of the change. I agree. We need to work together. We need to share. The opportunity is there. I mean, the amount of investment across the infrastructure, building, commercial, defense, everywhere globally is booming. It's massive opportunities for everyone, all engineers, all project controls, everyone involving in those projects, the finance people, everyone involving in those jobs. We need to work together, and we can achieve. I certainly believe that we can achieve together more. So definitely agree with you.
Great.
So
Thanks
on that basis, thank you. Let's keep in touch, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for staying with us, and look forward to have you in for the next session. Thank you.